Hello, and welcome to What We've Learned, another episode from Series 3. And as hopefully you know by now, Series 3 is all about leaders and pioneers. We've had some fascinating chat with the whole array of leaders and pioneers, and today is no exception. In fact, maybe it is an exception, because if you look up the word pioneer in the dictionary, you'll probably just see a picture of our today's guest, Ruth Owen. And if you don't know Ruth Owen, my goodness, you will by the end of this. But Shane, tell us a bit more about our illustrious guest.
So I'm fortunate enough to know Ruth well, and she's one of the people who really inspire me. She's currently Chief Executive Officer at Leonard Cheshire. She's also a member of the Mayors of London's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Group and participating in that, and a long and distinguished career in the charity sector. And she's going to share with us how she got there and what she's doing today.
And isn't she just quite an extraordinary woman, as you're about to find out? Please sit down and enjoy Ruth Owen.
Well, a really warm welcome, Ruth. It's a real pleasure to have you as a guest today. Thank you for joining us.
It's my absolute pleasure, Shane. I'm really looking forward to our chat together today.
So, you're well known in the charity sector, Ruth, very well known indeed, but that's not where you started, is it? So what was your first role when you came in to work?
Well, my first role, Shane, was just incredible. When I think back to where I started in a chemical company, local to home, doing admin and filing and data entry. But I always felt that I could do more. I thought it was a great opportunity for me to get my first role in employment because, as some of you will know, or nobody will know, that I'm actually a full-time wheelchair user. So, you know, somebody with a disability back then, work was not really an opportunity for them. Everybody told me quite openly that I would never work, and the job centre was down the road for benefits, and social housing was the other way. And by the way, why did you think you needed to go to work? And I thought, well, I definitely need to go to work. So I was really keen to get my first role in employment. And to be honest with you, Shane, I didn't really care what I did. And I know that doesn't sound so good, but I just knew it was such an opportunity to go to work that actually, if I started at the bottom, I could gradually work my way up to what I wanted to do. So that's how I started. And all those years ago, I still can remember my first day at work there and how anxious and scary it was because I didn't have any formal education. So I was, I knew what an opportunity I'd been given, but I was equally quite nervous as well.
See, Ruth, that's exactly why we've asked you to be on here, because this series, as you know, is Leaders and Pioneers, and to literally sit there and say, right, okay, everyone's telling me not to. It takes a certain type of person to say, no, hold on a minute, I'm going to push myself, I'm going to pioneer. And I'm sure we'll talk about this today in terms of latterly where you've got to and what you've championed so brilliantly. But back then, obviously the world, I'm sure, was different in terms of the chances. Did you feel a responsibility to you and indeed other wheelchair users to say, well, hold on a minute, this is about us, not just my career, that I can help strive a path? Or was it more kind of single-minded at that time? It's actually my desire to do something for me. I'm interested as to where that may have come in.
I have to be honest, Steve, I was doggedly determined for me. I don't know if that's, I should own up to that, but it's true. I was just so determined and I was just so single-minded. I mean, I was probably a pain in the ass to people around me at the time because I just thought, I've got to go to work. I knew that work was my route to independence and financial freedom. And it was expected of me. And I've said this many times before, that I would just stay with my mum and dad and live with my family. I wasn't expected to have an independent life. I certainly wasn't expected to have a mortgage or do any of those things. And it was openly talked about. Well, of course, you'll stay with your family, won't you, till the day you die? And I'm like, looking at my mum and dad, and as much as they're fantastic, I was thinking, not in a million years am I going to be staying here. And so I'd always dreamed of living and working in London. I never knew how I was going to achieve that, but I was single-mindedly determined. And when I did have to go to the job centre, and this particular gentleman said to me, well, you're not going to work, and I'm not quite sure why you've rocked up on my doorstep. And he said, I don't have any jobs to offer somebody like you. And I remember thinking, like me, I just use wheels to get around. Why do people not see the talent that maybe I've got to offer? But anyway, I said to him, well, if you're not going to help me, then I'm going to help myself. And when I've got something, I'm going to come back and tell you all about it. And, you know, I was with my mother at the time and she was horrified. My mother was much more, she was polite, and not say that I was rude, but I was certainly very assertive for myself. And I think that's being brought up in boarding school. I learned to fight for myself and have a voice. And I did go back and I did tell him. I told him I was a little bit on the tad rude side, but not too rude, and said, now listen, now what are you going to say about this when I'd secured my first job?
But how fantastic, because I mean, you know, it sounds like any other stroppy teenager, to be quite blunt, Ruth.
I was exactly that. I was coming up 19. I was a stroppy teenager. I wasn't having any of it. And if my mother got in the way, I used to say to her, look, I don't need you talking for me. And that is always a bit of a kind of thing, isn't it? With a child, if you're a parent of a disabled child, you feel that you need to kind of not protect them. She didn't protect me, but she kind of wanted to ease the pain, I think.
Yeah.
She wanted to make it all right for me. And to be honest, I used to say to her, you can't make it all right for me. I've got to learn to, you know, be independent and fight for myself and have my own voice. And credit to her, she did allow that for me to happen.
So two key things there, you know, that she gave you the space to do it. And I love the fact you reference your education, and you know there's a lot of talk about boarding schools and whether they're good or bad, but you know, independence is absolutely one of the things they foster, and it sounds as though that served you really well, you know, to have that, your own expectation of what you wanted from life. So that's really interesting. Where does it take you next, Ruth? What after your admin job?
Well, I think, you know what, boarding school was my father worked on the mines in Africa. You know, my parents had my father had his career. My mother was what you'd probably say is a corporate wife. And even though she'd had a career in the UK before we left to go to Africa, and I went to residential school because, you know, it was also deemed that somebody like me with a disability wouldn't actually go to mainstream school, and they weren't accessible back then. So, you know, residential care was where, with schooling on site, was where I ended up. And you know what, Shane, it probably was the best thing that my father and my mother did for me. It gave me that level of accountability for myself. It taught me resilience. I had nobody to go home and cry to at the end of the night. I went home twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year, but mostly only twice a year, to Zambia. And actually, I had to learn to kind of get on with it. And there was none of this, you know, I could go home and I'm going to cry to my parents about the difficult job and all the rest. I didn't have that. So, you know, that really taught me that I need to, if I want to achieve something, it's going to be down to me. And so when I got my first job, I then thought, right, what do I do next? I was a little bit bored. I wanted to learn more. I thought, right, I need to do something with my voice and my brain. So I then went to an oil company and I did telesales. And do you know what? That was because I thought, well, nobody can see me in a wheelchair. I'm just talking over a telephone, and they won't make any, you know, they can't judge me or by anything, because I'll know, unless I tell them I'm a wheelchair user, nobody would know. And I have to say, there was, like my previous boss, he saw something in me, my second boss, that and really kind of pushed me and promoted me and kind of did all those good things. But my desire was always to leave my hometown. I didn't want to live at home. I wanted to go out and get drunk. I wanted to go and have loads of friends. I mean, bear in mind, when I was at boarding school, I left most of my friends behind and had to start again. And you know, work is a great place for socializing and finding friends when you're young. And I thought, you know, I just need to get out of home. And so I thought, what am I going to do? And then, you know what? It's like, I don't know, it's luck or just sheer determination. I found a job doing telesales, but for a tech company in London. And, you know, and today they're known as Hewlett-Packard. But, you know, that was just the most amazing thing I did. And you know what's lovely about that story is that I'm still in touch with my first boss that employed me there. He's now in his 70s. He lives in London, and I'm still in touch with him today. He gave me my greatest and biggest opportunity. A wonderful, wonderful man. He employed me. They were an American company. I thought they'd be much more progressive in terms of disability, particularly with, vets and all the rest of it. And it was the best thing I did. And, listen, I had to work hard, but it definitely was the best thing I did.
It's really interesting, Ruth. I mean, we've talked to a number of people on this series, and the thread that comes out is that kind of self-determination, but equally that it's not a unique skill. Anybody, if they're in the right environment, either by kind of circumstance and difficult circumstance for you, or fostered into a place of confidence, can achieve perhaps more than they realise, or in your case, made to feel by others. I just wonder on those, do you think there was a thread for those first hiring managers, that they were the same kind of people? What was it that was different about them that made them take a chance in you? Or was it that you had to actually, I guess, work even harder than, if I can use in inverted commas, the average person to get across how great you were?
I definitely had to do the latter. I definitely had to, once I got the opportunity, I knew I had to work harder than my colleagues. I think, going to your point about those managers, you know what? I think they had great empathy. When I talked to my boss today, the guy at HB, he had great empathy. He had an ability to spot talent, and he was also very accommodating of difference. He didn't judge, and he was amazing. He really was truly amazing. Now, listen, he just gave me the opportunity, gave me the job, and the rest was down to me to make of that role what I did. But I kind of, after I did telesales, I then said I wanted to go into frontline sales. And I remember but it wasn't this particular boss, but the gentleman at the time said to me, well, what do you think your clients are going to think about you being in a wheelchair doing frontline sales? I said, listen, they've got much more to worry about what comes out of my mouth rather than worrying about the four wheels that are attached to my arse. And I said to him, well, I'm prepared to take that risk. I said, the risk is all with me. I said, if I don't deliver, you'll fire me like you fire anybody else. So I said, so where's the risk to you? There is no risk. I said, the risk is all with me. So you get behind me and back me, and I'll make it happen. And I was one of their most successful people at the time. So I think, for me, it was about, I knew that my life couldn't be about doing nothing. I just couldn't do nothing. I just thought that I had a contribution to make in the employment market. I also thought that anybody that was negative in my life, and I've got two things that I did. When I left school, I ditched the medical profession. So when I got to 18 and my mother gave me much more of a choice over my health and everything, I got rid of my doctors and I got rid of my consultant. I went to see them and told him he'd never see me again. Because the time before that I saw him, he said to me, you'll be dead at 40. And I said, well, I'll be the judge of that, not you. And I walked out and I thought, I'm never going to see you again. And I never did see him again. And I'm touch wood. I mean, I've got another funny story, but I won't tell you on this. But I just don't, I try to keep out of the medical profession's way. So I got rid of them. And then I secondly got rid of, because I was in residential care, I had social services quite actively in my life. And I got rid of them as well, because they all kept telling me no. And I don't like the word no. I like the word yes much more.
I think that's really fascinating, that empowerment of almost permission to get or ditch the negative, as you say. And as you say, people who say no, particularly when they are in trusted professions, let's be honest about this, Ruth, too long of perhaps is, well, I have to go along with what you say. So I think that's, that sheer, again, we sound like sheer bloody mindedness. No, I don't accept what you're going to say. And I had a similar experience myself. I broke my back when I was 17 and I was told that I shouldn't take up sport. So, of course, went off to university and chose the worst sport to take up, which was rowing, to put a strain on my back, because I was absolutely convinced that was the way I was going to get better. But it could have gone horribly wrong. Did you ever worry about it going horribly wrong by you saying no?
You know what? I think the great thing about being young is you don't worry about the consequences quite so much as you do when you're older. I just thought, I guess the other big impact in my life, I lost my sister that was next to me at 19. I was 19. She was younger. She was 18 months younger than me in a car accident. She was a passenger in a car accident. She died instantly. I think after that, I thought, what's the worst that can happen to me? Most people can say no to me. Well, no's just a word, and it doesn't really hurt me. After losing somebody in your family suddenly, you know, I always work back from, well, if nobody's died, then okay, let's see what we need to do. So I kind of was like, I'm going to make this happen for myself, and if it takes me longer, if I have to go around it in a slightly different way, I'm actually going to do it. And I didn't, if I'm honest with you, Shane, I didn't worry about the consequences of failure.
And Ruth, I mean, let's go back to the telesales and into that technology space. It's fair to say you kind of undercalled quite how well you've done in that space. I wonder if we can talk about, you know, that phase of your career as a total of quite how far you got, and not only what you achieved, but what it taught you and how it's led on to latter things in life.
Well, it taught me about relationships with other people. It taught me how important it was to have a you know, great colleagues that you worked with. It taught me that, you know, how to enjoy life, if I'm honest with you. You know, I'd come through a pretty difficult family circumstances of losing a sibling, you know, so that was hard as a family. That was very, very tough. You know, my parents had already had it tough with me being ill as a young person. You know, I was walking, and then I had a vaccination, and then when I was young, inoculation, and I never walked again. So my parents had had all of that trauma. And, you know, my parents were actively encouraged to put me in an institution at 7, which, to be fair, I did go into for 3 months. But I was then very naughty and obnoxious, and I'd had a black eye, and I'd had my chair confiscated from me for being cheeky. And so my parents took me out of that institution. So my parents had already had it tough, and then they'd had it tough through losing my sister. So I think it taught me how important life is, how to grasp the moment, not to be looking to other people to provide you with that level of happiness or security. And that was really down to you. And I think that still holds me in good stead today. You know, if I want to do something different, or, you know, I'm not quite sure, I'm not happy, then really that's down to me to go and make that different, or do something different, and take a bit of a chance and take a little bit of a risk. Because I think sometimes we don't always do that as human beings. So it's easy for us to moan about stuff, isn't it, rather than do something different. And actually, what I did really value is just how lucky I was to have such an amazing employer that saw my talents rather than my disability. So it saw that I had something to offer the organisation, and it saw the contribution that I could make. So it taught me a lot, and it taught me a lot about business, if I'm honest with you.
So just about learning about business, and I love the fact, and it's no surprise to me at all, Ruth, knowing you as well as I do, that you were topped the sales charts, because you do have an amazing ability to get people almost without knowing it to do things. And it's interesting, I find often in the UK particularly, we're a little, how should we say, we're a little snobby about sales skills. And I, like you, I started in sales, and thank goodness I did, because to me it's one of the most important commercial skills that anybody can learn. What were the other commercial skills that you learned, as well as to be able to negotiate and persuade people?
Well, I guess one thing I did learn, Shane, was I learned the dynamics of relationships and politics. I don't like to use that word, but people and human beings. And sometimes I always say to people that you end up being much more of a psychiatrist in doing the roles that we do as in leaderships, don't we? Because it teaches you it teaches you how to have empathy with the other person, understand their point of view. It teaches you how to lead people and how to motivate people to go that extra mile. And I think one of the things I really loved and enjoyed was just being part of a team. And it wasn't all about me. And all right, in sales, sometimes it can be seen as a very I, but I always think it's also about we. It's about the collective. You do much more together than you do as somebody on their own. But it taught me to, you know, listen, I had to travel with my job. So that was also a challenge as a wheelchair user. But, you know, it taught me a lot of those kind of business skills and a lot of things that are not so obvious. that, you know, when you're in a business meeting, like reading the room and all of those things. And I guess that, you know, being a wheelchair user, and always because I didn't get my first wheelchair till I was 7. So I was often plonked in on a dining room chair or a lounge chair by my family and surrounded by my parents' friends. And I learned quite early on the conversation of adults and responsibility. So that stood me in, and being emotionally intelligent, and that stood me in good stead for my working career, because I was already quite tuned into how people thought and think. And so that just helped me through my sales life, if I'm honest with you.
It's interesting, Ruth. I've mentioned this before, actually, on earlier podcasts. There's a book that just come to mind by Daniel H. Pink called To Sell is Human. And as you said, you know, and Shane said, you've made an incredibly successful career of being able to sell. But it doesn't matter if you're listening into this and you're in a sales role or whatever role. We sell all of the time, or we have to sell all of the time. And he talks about how a modern salesperson is, in whatever, you know, selling to one's family or friends or whatever it is more of an omnivore. They've got, I guess, that emotional intelligence, that empathy, that there are times when you need to be the extrovert and the shouty one, or that 19-year-old self one that's determined and, you know, on the borderline of rude to what you've said, but just I'm going to show you, versus the more reflective, the quieter one that knows when to give a gap, when to give space. It all feels like all of that you've encountered has helped you just to refine that selling ability, but not just as a salesperson, in all the roles that you've had. Yeah,
definitely. And I think it just teaches you about people. You know, people are interested. We're not all the same, which is fantastic, really, isn't it? It's good. Thank God we're not all the same. You know, God, I've met another one of me, like that would be painful, I'm sure, in parts. But I think it's just that ability to storytell. It's the ability to communicate. It's the ability to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I think, you know, I try to do that, and, you know, I try and do it with some grace, and be humble about that, if I'm honest with you. And I haven't forgotten where I started, and I do pinch myself and think, oh goodness me, people say to me, you've done really well, and I look back and I go, and I sometimes don't believe it myself. I go, well, have I? And of course I have, but I don't always believe that of myself, really, if I'm honest.
Again, that self-belief and sort of imposter syndrome, it's really fascinating talking to all of the different leaders that we've been interviewing. They've all mentioned it, which I think, you know, that ability to question yourself must be part of what makes a good leader. But I'm also fascinated. It sounds like you have this really interest in people, and you've ended up in a sector, let's be really honest about it, you know, charity, one of the toughest sectors, particularly today, with probably the most diverse group of stakeholders of any business. So you must really love that difficult challenge of a wide stakeholder group, Ruth, because otherwise you wouldn't be so successful.
Well, I do love it. And I think philanthropy I was always going to end up in the sector. I just didn't know it as a young person, because my mother we always had philanthropy in our home life. You know, my mother was a big supporter of kids in the internationally. My mother did a lot for Red Cross. She also, we had foster children in our home. My mother was an amazing giver. She was very selfless, and we had Leonard Cheshire in our home because she worked in a Leonard Cheshire care setting as a night staff, because she was a nurse. And so it was always brought up in our lives. And I think of all of us, and I'm one of 5, one of us was going to take on her mantle. And I didn't know it was going to be me. In reality, I should have known that, because I spent an enormous amount of time with my mother, because being sick, young, you know, she looked after me. And I'm extremely grateful for, you know, some of the life lessons that she gave me, like things like she'd say to me when I was younger, well, you know, you're the oldest of my children, and, you know, there might be something wrong with your legs, but there's nothing wrong with your brain. And if anything happens to me, I expect you to look after your siblings, and I expect you to look after your dad, and da 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 da. So she always put that huge level of responsibility on me. So I never thought I'd end up in the charity sector. And it was only the fact that I got to my early 30s and I thought, I need to do more with my life. You know, I needed purpose. I needed to give back, because she'd always given back. And I thought, what can I do? And then I joined a board of a charity as a trustee. And that really set me on the path that I am today, because I thought I can do more. And I went to a number of services where, you know, I'd met young people that were looking after their siblings, and, you know, they'd have an alcoholic father or, you know, a drug addict mother. And I remember meeting one young lad that really left an impression on me, and he was only 7 or 8. And it kind of took me back to where I was at that age, which I remembered vividly. And I thought, you know what, Ruth, I need to change the course of my life. And that really did it for me, if I'm honest. And, you know, just having that kind of very giving parent that would help anybody really set me on the path to doing the job I'm doing today.
It's very open of you, Ruth, but and very giving towards your parents, to give you the credit. But it takes a certain type of person as well. I mean, massive credit to you, because lots of people may come out of those environments and think, I should do something different. I could do something different, but not do it. I mean, you obviously have made that change. And if we talk about, if you don't mind, your current role, because it's quite a recent change into Leonard Cheshire. Tell us about that, how that started, and what your team and what your now and the future looks like in terms of what you've got to tackle there.
Well, if you'd have said to me at the beginning of the pandemic that I would change my role in the year of the pandemic, I would have said, oh, you're crazy. But I always felt that, you know, listen, it was a privilege to lead Whizz-Kidz for the length of time that I did. But I felt that my journey at Whizz-Kidz was coming to an end. I felt that, you know, I needed something different. I wanted a bigger platform to make a greater change for the disabled community. You know, as much as it was amazing putting kids into mobility equipment, I felt that I could do so much more. And so when Leonard Cheshire opportunity came to me in the summer last year, I thought, why wouldn't I? It had been in my home life. You know, the man back then was an amazing innovator and a pioneer. I thought, you know, this is such a great opportunity to have a greater impact on the world, to make the world a fair and inclusive society for disabled people. So listen, I went through the process. I was super fortunate to get the role. I was so excited when I got the role. I think the day I was offered the job, I think I went out and in the evening and I'm not really a drinker, but I had a little glass of Prosecco to celebrate the start of my next chapter. And then I started in the early parts of this year, the 1st of Feb, all virtually. But you know what? I absolutely love it, because I cannot think of an organisation it's a global organisation in the disability field. And it's amazing in the fact that we want to fight for an fair and inclusive world for disabled people. The fact that disability has slipped down the agendas is not right, and it needs to be higher up the agenda. And we need to be having those conversations every day, like we are about LGBTQI. I mean, done an amazing job. Black Lives Matters, super important. Disability needs to be a mainstream conversation. And I look forward to the day, and I'm hopeful that I'm going to make this big difference at my role at Leonard Cheshire with my team and all the people that I work with in the wider stakeholder group, that we're not having a conversation about how does a disabled person or a person with disabilities get employment. We don't have to have those conversations, because the world has made changes for an inclusive society. That would be my dream. I mean, if I achieve that, I'm going to go and sit on the beach somewhere.
I think
in the sun.
In the sun, yeah, and I'll be there with you, Ruth. I think that's a beach in the sun is a welcome dream for all of us at the moment. But I think it might come as a surprise. I think it's quite interesting, the whole Leonard Cheshire charities. You say it's a brand you knew through your parents, and actually it's again one I know through my parents. But maybe there are generations. You mentioned Leonard Cheshire himself as a pioneer, and perhaps I'll come back to him and what an amazing man he was. But there may be people who don't realise just how big you are as an organisation. And I was just looking on the website, and 6,000 staff, 6,500 volunteers, helping over 30,000 people. I'm sure far more than that, in fact, and a global reach. I mean, that's something possibly. It's been a bit of a hidden story. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. So I think the challenge and the opportunity I've got at Leonard Cheshire with the team and I is really to make Leonard Cheshire, accessible to the younger generation. So I think there's a group of people that, you know, like you said, Shane, that will know Leonard Cheshire from the amazing man he was. But the younger generation, when I was coming for the role and I said to them, well, you know, what do you know about Leonard Cheshire? You know, they'd look at me and go, nothing. So I think we've got to make Leonard Cheshire relevant. I think we've got to, you know, make Leonard Cheshire an organisation that really is, a disabled-led organisation and fighting for the rights of disabled people. And I always say as well, making Leonard Cheshire even more customer obsessed and making sure that our voice of our customers over everything that we do, and we're enabling our customers to be the voice for themselves, like my mother did for me. She allowed me to speak for myself. You know, at times she would step in, but by and large, I spoke for myself. And I think, you know, my role as leading the organisation, and it's a huge privilege, is to actually put our customers at the centre of everything we do, and then actually empower our customers to actually talk globally for what they feel is important and the rights that they want to see and the changes that they want to see in society. And I think, to be honest with you, Shane, create a social movement where actually, you know, people say, get other disabled people, non-disabled people, to be as feisty about the rights of disabled people as disabled people themselves. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, absolutely. To mobilise those people. We talked actually with another guest around women in boards and how actually they hoped when they started that they could almost, you know, nearly 10 years down the track, not be doing the job anymore. And it seems similar that incredible vision and passion you've got effectively may make you redundant one day, Ruth, but it sounds like you'd be delighted by that if actually it's just normalized that everybody, regardless of their able or disabled status, just starts to see everybody as the same and recognizes, as you've managed to strive through your career with those managers that have taken a chance, to see the person for what they're capable of, not what they're incapable of.
Yeah, definitely, Steve. I mean, I think, you know, I always say to people, look, I might be in a wheelchair and you can see my disability very visibly because, you know, I sit in a wheelchair, but 1 in 5 people will have a disability and some of it's not very visible. And I think, you know, I think the world needs to be made much more inclusive. We need to be looking at people's abilities and it's possibility with disability, isn't it? We want to be able to live, learn and earn. And it doesn't matter, you know, whether you have a disability. It becomes almost irrelevant. So when that day happens, it will be fantastic. But I've got a lot of work to do to get there. But I like hard work. I mean, listen, if I didn't have a purpose and I didn't have a goal, I'd be rubbish.
You are a glutton for hard work. I'll second that. And I think, you know, just taking on the fact you're out to create a social movement and, you know, the aspiration, because it has to be that big, doesn't it? And I love the fact you refer to not every disability can be seen, and nor should it in a way, but how do you make the world a more inclusive, you know, place? Just how do you do that, Ruth? I mean, just how do you get people to understand that it benefits us all? You know, it's for everybody's benefit to have this more inclusive world.
I think it's really sad that I have to say this, but I think it has to be around the economic modelling of it all. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, my pound is as good as your pound, Shane, or Steve's pound. I think it's about the purple pound. I think it's about education. I think it's about the benefits rather than negatives. I think it's about us as disabled people really champion other disabled people and actually also championing change. I mean, change comes from people, doesn't it? You know, any big changes in the world they haven't come from policies and procedures and governments and all the rest of it. It's come from society, hasn't it? It's come from communities. It's come from people feeling really strongly about something. I mean, you know, that's really evident through Black Lives Matters. You know, that's around people coming together and saying this is not right. And so I think for me, it's about how do I create that passion in non-disabled people, but also disabled people? And then how do I set about getting businesses and getting bigger stakeholders to actually say, you know what, you're absolutely right. And I have to say, it has to come round to money as well. I mean, it has to be about, society seeing disabled people as contributors, contributing to the economy, contributing to their local communities, contributing to society. And let's be clear, not all disabled people will be in employment. I mean, but independence for one disabled person is very different from independence for another disabled person. And so I'm all about making the world fair and inclusive for disabled people, and providing opportunities for disabled people to have that opportunity to do whatever they want to do, whatever they choose to do.
It feels almost, Ruth, like back to that 19-year-old self where that guy sits across from you at the job centre and says, I've got nothing because you're disabled. It's not disability. It's about looking at somebody's capability. And with my marketing hat on, just listening to you, it feels like it's a branding exercise as well. Or an advertising exercise, that the more times you see the right kind of behaviours in enough places, eventually it sticks. And as you say, you can see this perhaps with gender equality, you can see it with gay rights, you can see it with Black Lives Matter. It's only a good thing. The more that your message is out there in enough places, it eventually just normalizes that people are just seen as people, rather than, we'll look at her on her four wheels or whatever the abnormality might be that to people. It's that chance to just get the brand out there. And it perhaps, is it also influences as well, if I use modern parlance, that you've got those role models, people that have like you, but others that transcend, and people can on both sides of the able versus disabled fence can actually just see as a brilliant human being, and therefore they see them first, not, as I say, they see their capability, not their disability.
Definitely. And do you not think through the pandemic, I think one of the things that I think has come very clear is that people's kindness to other human beings is brought people closer together through the pandemic. And I think, it is about a branding exercise, and it's also about just human beings. At the end of everything that we do, there's usually a person at the end of that, isn't there? And I think, I'd like to think that through coming out of the pandemic, the disabled community has been so, vastly disadvantaged, and, lots of social injustices. And I'm just like, I'm hoping that the level of kindness that we will look at other people with a disability, whether it's very visible or hidden, and we'll show some level of kindness to that other human being, and actually say, well, actually, that person deserves to have the same opportunities as I do.
I echo that, Ruth. I think, it's interesting. There's a lot of, I'm not a futurologist, and, most futurologists get it wrong, but I think everybody's agreed that we're at a point with our society now where we will talk about pre-COVID and post-COVID. And I think these societal shifts are huge that are going to be post-COVID. And they're really big ones. Like you mentioned, the reflection of what matters to people. We've had this period of reflection, enforced reflection, and what's important. And it's really interesting, as you say, that kindness is definitely one that's come out, along with reconnecting to the local community, which for many of us, if you were commuting into London, you just didn't have. But that power of the local neighbourhood to support you, or your flat next to you, but just micro geography. And then the last point, to one that Steve references, actually, because we've all been stuck on our screens, what's really impressed me is actually there has been greater visibility of disabled people. I think Ruth Madley, for example, she was on Celebrity MasterChef. I think Hannah Crockcroft has been quite visible. And so it's really starting to happen. Do you think so? Do you think it is a tipping point, Ruth?
I definitely do. I definitely do. And I think, I think, if you'd have gone pre the pandemic, one of the big challenges for disabled people in employment is it was hard. Infrastructure, if I just think of myself in London, I think I've been on the tube in my life probably 3 times because it's just not accessible. Listen, it's getting better, but it's not that accessible. So, getting to work was it was like climbing Mount Everest if you were either in London, or if you were in a city that wasn't totally accessible, or if you're in a rural area, how hard would that be if the bus didn't have a ramp and all the rest of it? So I think with digital and technology, it's a massive opportunity for the disabled community to be able to, you know, go into the workforce. So, you know, listen, when I sit on Zoom all day in Teams, nobody would know I was sitting in a wheelchair. You can't see it. So I'm hoping post-pandemic that there's going to be greater opportunity for the disabled community to have full-time employment. And that's one of the things that we will be fighting for at Leonard Cheshire. It's about, you know, how do we, in this day and age, make the very best of technology work for the disabled community? And I always say to people, you know, tech has changed my life, you know, for the better. It's enabled me to have a much more independent life. And I think what's great is the younger generation of disabled people are much more impatient. You know, they've been brought up on smartphone technology and, you know, iPads and all the rest of it. And I'll be honest with you, Shane, I mean, I'm a one-click finger lady. I mean, God, if I have to go through loads of screens and all the rest of it, I can't be asked. I give up. I mean, you know, that's what Amazon have done so well. And, you know, and I don't even use a debit card now with PayPal and Apple Pay and everything. So, you know, the young generation of being disabled people have been brought up on that. They want change. They want it quicker than maybe my generation have waited for. And actually, they can't see any reason why not with technology as it is. And I really endorse that. I think rightly so. So let's see greater change and let's see it quicker, because we've seen through the pandemic as well, when government wants to do something and enable society, it can be done very quickly and money can be thrown at it. So I'm hoping that we're going to see greater infrastructure changes that are more inclusive for the society that we live in today.
Here. Wow. And it's your role, Ruth, in that is going to be so pivotal. But you've got so much more to want to do and to offer. But it feels like you're almost on that. You've got that brilliant position to hand the baton on, to work with that next generation. You know, the 19-year-old versions of you, if you cast your mind back there. And I wonder, because conscious of your time, but I wonder if I can ask you perhaps one final question. As you know, the podcast is what we've learned, and is there, and you've given so much in terms of advice today and thoughts, but if you went back to your 19-year-old self now, are there one, maybe two things that you might say to you back then, or to others, that next generation that are coming through, that you think has served you, what you know now you wish you'd have known then?
Well, I think, you know, when I look back to my younger self, I think if I was talking to a young person today, I don't think you should ever give up your dream. I had a dream, I had a goal, and I was not going to be deterred. I know I might have been knocked off the path a couple of times in terms of a slightly, you know, you might have to, instead of going straightwards, you might have to go around a bit to get back on the path. But I was absolutely determined. So I'd say to young people, you know, if you really do want something, you should absolutely go for it. Don't be scared of not if you can't quite get there and you end up somewhere else and you might have failed along the way. Failure's good. My failures have taught me much more than my successes. When I haven't been able to get something I wanted, I thought, right, okay, I need to think about this a slightly different way. Or I've also taken the other route and said, well, it wasn't meant to be. And so I'm a great believer in that. And I think the other thing I would say is that, you know, life isn't fair. And so, you know, especially this younger generation, they've been brought up in a generation of having, and I only look at this with my own nephews and nieces, you know, most things to their fingertips. For a lot of disabled people, that is still, you know, they still have to fight, you know, to have a job, to have a mainstream education, to have accessible housing, all of those things. So there is a fight for still a lot of people. And I think just to show some level of kindness to people, you know, when I was young, I don't know if I did do that. I tried to be a good citizen back then, but I'm not sure I was as good as I could have been, because I was focused on proving a point, if I'm honest with you. So I think it's important, particularly today, to go for your dream, but also just have a little bit of kindness to other people along the way.
Well, Shane, inspiring stuff, as we thought and as we knew we'd get from Ruth. I hope you've all really, really taken something from that. A lovely place to end as well, Shane, that balance of, yes, be nicer to people, a sentiment that's easily said, but balance it with, you've got to have your own goals as well. Don't trample on other people. Use in a positive way, but work on your own goals. And I guess it would have been easy, Shane, for someone like Ruth, through pivotal points in her life, that job centre moment back at the early stages of her career, it could have gone one of two ways. Some people see those sliding door opportunities or as threats. It's a really interesting one where certain things can trigger certain changes in people's lives for the good.
Yes, I think those sort of, as you say, sliding door moments are really interesting to reflect on. And I suspect you and I both had them ourselves, but everybody listening thinking about, well, I wonder what would have happened if I did this differently. And it is seeing that, rather than a sliding door, perhaps a sort of the door half open or half closed. And
to that point, then, Shane, is there anything that came to mind for you? Just the catalyst that in your life has opened?
There is. There's a number of things actually. I mean, I think there's lots of things that have happened in my life which definitely I can look back and say, gosh, that was quite a changing point. And one for me was in the sixth form. I'm absolutely passionate, loved my school life, was very happy there, adored my subjects, geography and history and biology. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, had no idea. Was going out with a lovely chap at the time who had applied to Cambridge. And I thought, oh, that sounds quite interesting. So I sort of said to school, I said, my school was a comprehensive school. How do you apply to that? Oh, well, you have to be invited to join the Oxbridge set, which is run by one of the teachers who went there, and you have to be invited. And I said, well, I haven't been invited. And they said, well, no, because you've not been put on the list. And I said, but I want to go there. And they said, oh, well, we've never had anybody who hasn't been invited. And I said, well, this is a bit silly if I really want to go there, and I've researched it and I can do historical geography, which I love. And they said, oh, well, we'll see if they can fit you in. And it was all so bizarre. It was very odd. And then I have to say, I sort of reflecting back on it, I could have that I did get in. So, it was the seize the moment day. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's that sliding doors. By the way, it is worth, Shane, perhaps because you've told me this in the past, that the college choice as well that you went with, and any particular reason you chose the college. Of course, it was for the academic rigour. Is that the only reason?
Completely and utterly. No, not at all, Steve. You know me far too well. No, I chose to go to Jesus College, Cambridge, because 1979, and this is, gosh, ancient history, they were taking women for the first time. And I really liked the idea, because I'd gone to an all-girls school, of going, obviously, to college where it was next, but also of actually being one of the first. That really appealed. And talking to my cohort and those I stayed friends with, and reflecting on those who joined in that first year, we all had that sense of wanting to be part of something special and making history. And the other reason, being really honest, was I was a lazy sportswoman. And it's one of the few colleges surrounded by its beautiful sports grounds. And you didn't have to trek miles to go and play hockey or tennis or any of the other things that I love doing. So two good reasons to apply there.
Very smart insight. Yeah, ancient history, as you say, but more about the geography, literally. The study and the ability to get to where you want to from a sporting point of view. And maybe, just maybe, Shane, first intake of females might have been an awful lot more undergrads who are male that might have been of interest. Who knows? Funnily
enough, the ratio was 30 of us and 300 of them. But what about you? What about, you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, again, I think I'm sure anyone listening in, and as you could say, there's quite a few moments you look back in reflection. But for me, and it's a similar time, actually. So doing my A-levels, geography being one of them, and economics, and in fact, theatre studies, that holy trinity of A-levels, although theatre studies is more English literature, I guess. Similar, but not quite the same path. But I was wanting desperately to go and do performing arts at university, but it became quite clear quite quickly that although academically I might get there, it just wasn't necessarily the right life choice in terms of being able to support oneself. And then actually, quite sadly, it became clear that going to university and pivoting, is that the right word still in 2021, into a more business and finance based degree just wasn't going to happen because of family circumstance. So it left me actually at 18, 19, desperate to learn and better myself, but with no real opportunity, or seemingly no opportunity, Shane. And as you'll know, when I was 19, girl I was dating at the time, her father, I can distinctly remember sitting in his living room, almost in a kind of 1950s style. The ladies will go off to the kitchen now, and him sitting across from me and saying, along the lines of, "So you're going to spend your life working in a shoe shop forever? Is that your plan?" And I don't know, Shane, to this day. It's a really interesting one. As to whether that was meant as a fuel or whether it was meant, and I took it actually as a, well, you're not good enough, and that fired me up to say, right, what can I do? And I went down a different academic route. I started night school almost immediately, and found my passion and some academic rigor to what I was doing. That those very small moments can happen in life, that, you know, and Ruth really embodied that, didn't she? That 18, 19-year-old Ruth that's sitting across from that job centre person who can just, you know, label people and potentially allow someone to be put in a box. And Ruth was quite rightly not having any of it. There's a much bigger world that I'm going to find rather than being labelled or boxed.
And just sheer resilience, I think, is what came through from Ruth. And I think it's really interesting, you know, to reflect on what you've said. Sort of, again, it's people who spur you to do things or make you think about things differently. Sort of just think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm going to prove you wrong. Which sometimes, for some of us who like to prove people wrong, that can be an important spur. So those listening, you know, who perhaps have got teenage children, is that I'm not sure whether that would now be an agreed way of mentoring people, but it's interesting sometimes those comments.
Very much so. Yeah. And actually back to that pioneer piece, we talked about Leonard Cheshire, the charity, and Ruth's new role, but we didn't really talk about Leonard Cheshire, the man. And I have to say, Shane, I knew the charity, but I didn't really know much about Leonard Cheshire until we spoke to Ruth. Perhaps you know more about this man than I. It'd be really interesting to hear more about him.
Yeah, and absolutely fascinating. And I think Life Peer, one of the most decorated war heroes of the Second World War, BC. He was a group captain. He got the Distinguished Flying Cross as well. Just absolutely illustrious career in the RAF, and actually was held up as a real hero to people of my parents' generation. So I think that for them, he was an absolute household name, as much for what he went on to do as for what he actually did in the war. And that was to found this hospice for, you know, people who had been injured in the war and for those with disabilities, which became the Leonard Cheshire Homes. And that but it was really deep within his psyche about helping others. And being able to show that, you know, everybody could make a valuable contribution. Exactly what Ruth is saying about founding a movement today. And I think that's something that you and I are both equally passionate about. Perhaps haven't done what Ruth's done, but in terms of saying, actually, everybody has a huge contribution to make, and we just somehow need to make it easier. And I think that's something that Leonard Cheshire for the next generation can provide that. So I hope that lots of people listening to this, Steve, will think, well, gosh, within my organisation, you know, how could I perhaps find that talent? How could I engage that? How do I go about being a wider and more inclusive employer?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Leonard Cheshire almost embodies all three of those. So the leaders and the pioneers that we've been speaking about on this series, but also, as Ruth ended on, as we picked up, that balance of running your own race, achieving your own goals, but being kinder and being supportive. It would have been very easy for him to take literally his accolades and medals and swan off, but he found a new challenge, which is to leave a legacy and to support others like him or not like him at all, which I think is a lesson, particularly on that not like us. And as you say, I think anyone that's listened into this today, if you're not familiar with what Leonard Cheshire do, go and have a look at leonardcheshire.org, particularly if you're an employer. You know, open one's eyes and think, well, okay, are there people that aren't like us, that are a brilliant opportunity? Because as Ruth embodies, you know, you don't need to be defined by your legs, your wheels, or whatever it may be. There's so much more that people can offer. So there's an onus on that individual, and maybe a sliding doors moment, as we talked about, Shane, but also what can others do to be kinder or indeed smarter? How can you bring people in? So have a look there. And by the way, we didn't even get a chance to talk about Ruth, but if in the detail of her accolades. But if you want to follow her, find her on Twitter at Ruth Owen OBE. yes, Ruth Owen OBE. We didn't even have time to talk about that, but there's the mark of what Ruth has attained so far. And as you talked about, and as we know, Shane, from her track record, I don't think it'll be the last we hear of Ruth and what she's going to try and attain over the next few years with her movement. So that's all we've got time for today. Thanks ever so much to Ruth again. Truly insightful, inspiring stuff from her. Thanks as ever to Shane, but mostly thank you to you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Feel free to comment. You'll find us at wwlpodcast.co.uk. That will route you through to LinkedIn, where you can comment on this episode and others. And as ever, you can find all of the episodes from all 3 series so far on Spotify, on Apple Music, on Google, on Acast, wherever you take your podcasts from. We'll be there, and we'd be very happy to hear from you at any time in the future. We'll be back with another episode soon, but for now, thanks everyone.